Today, we're at Wimbledon School of English talking to teachers about how they plan their lessons.
Multi-level classes are always tricky, and I think you need to make sure that there's material which they can all access in some way, and then have some activities ready for the ones who finish first or perhaps find it easier, have a bit more in-depth activities that test their language skills a little bit more, but still keeping the lesson at the level which the less able ones can kind of engage with.
The same vocabulary and grammar always repeats itself. So students at a B1 level will learn conditionals. At a B2 level, they'll revise and perhaps learn some more specific structures. At a C1 level, same thing again. But it's just the leveling of this. So the presentation of language happens to be the same. You still establish your context in the same way. But if there's multiple levels, like someone who's really having difficulty, I'll simplify those structures. And actually by doing this, I've actually established an order of structures that are easier to acquire.
I think the first thing is, even if you're rushed for time, is to not skip the activation of schemata. Certain textbooks, if they are particularly dry, need you to personalise that, and it's not impossible. So to try and think of something in their life or their experience that might be related to the reading and listening before you do it.
I think any teacher's personality normally will come in without them even trying to do it, who they are. So when I walk into a classroom, there's a lot of energy and a lot of buzz, just because I feel the need to perform, in a sense. And my students will comment on that as being my personal style. So personalizing the classroom from the teacher's perspective, I think teachers do it naturally anyway.
I think personalisation is really important for teaching in general, so I try and personalise pretty much every activity. If I can relate it directly to the students' lives, I will, or I'll ask them for their personal reactions to things perhaps in the news or in the readings or listenings that we do. But most things, I think it's easy to personalise. You can just change the focus a little bit to make it relevant for the student.
I think the one that's most neglected is the affective filter, and what I mean by that is certain students take criticism more kindly than others, and that might be to do with personality or it might be to do with nationality. And so, for example, we have every Friday we do a test related to the week's work. And I try and diffuse any tension as much as I can from that. So, for example, before the test, I ask them to ask me any questions that they might have from revising the night before. When they do the test, I don't time. I ask them just to put their pen down at the end of the test, so I know that they've all finished. And we try and appease any of that kind of pressure and tension that certain students might feel more than others.
Really boring activities in course books are probably the main problem that we have to overcome. So, finding ways to use the material in the course book, but in perhaps a more fun way, maybe introducing an element of competition or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think dull activities are the biggest thing to plan for. Also, perhaps students not understanding something which you expected them to understand, maybe something you've covered in a previous lesson that you think they should remember and they don't remember it. So yeah, those are probably the most typical things.
Probably the biggest issue with that teachers should anticipate but perhaps don't is actually just the motivation of the learner. I mean, they anticipate problems like, oh, they probably won't understand this, or oh, they'll have difficulties pronouncing this, but that's not so much a big deal. The biggest problem is that learners perhaps might not want that language, and dealing with that, finding a good way to motivate them through things that they enjoy, or motivating them through successes. So I'll teach the driest grammar possible, but I'll still get students smiling about it because that motivation can be sparked with small successes, starting them on something that's quite difficult, showing them that they've done well, then giving them a little bit more and a little bit more. And by the end of the lesson, you've had 10 successes and they're incredibly motivated, even with very boring grammar. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that teachers don't anticipate but should.